It all started that day when James, came home earlier than usual. My last class got canceled, which meant I'd have the house to myself. A rare and welcome chance to relax without interruptions. Normally, my stepmom Lauren would be working in her art studio out back, deep in her world of canvases and paints, and my dad wouldn't be home until late. It was usually the perfect time to unwind in peace, but that day something felt off. As soon as I stepped inside, a strange feeling settled over me, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to my imagination. But as I passed by the door to Dad's old study, now Lauren's home office, I noticed it was cracked open slightly and faint voices drifted out from the room. I froze, straining to hear, and quickly realized Lauren was talking to someone. Curiosity got the better of me. Usually I'd never eavesdrop, but something told me to stay put. Peeking through the gap in the door, I spotted Lauren seated in front of her laptop, talking to a man I didn't recognize. His voice was soft and intimate, filled with a warmth that struck me as strange. He was speaking to her in a way that seemed personal. And the way she responded, with that relaxed, almost dreamy smile, it was like she'd forgotten everything else around her. Lauren looked different in that moment, and I felt an uncomfortable stirring in my chest. This wasn't the same woman I was used to seeing day in and day out. She was usually so practical, always keeping things together at home. But here, she seemed like a totally different person, someone more vulnerable, more alive. I knew I should have left right then, but I couldn't pull myself away. The man on the screen continued talking, laughing softly at something she said, and she laughed along, her expression light and easy. I had never seen her like this, so carefree and happy. It was unsettling, and questions swirled in my mind, each one more confusing than the last. Was this just a friend? Or was it something more? Finally, I stepped back from the door and closed it as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I went back to my room, hoping to distract myself, but the scene I'd stumbled upon refused to leave my mind. I couldn't forget the way she looked, that soft smile, that glint in her eye. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a casual chat with an old friend, yet deep down, something didn't sit right. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying everything in my mind. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking things, but the uneasy feeling stuck with me, lingering like a shadow in the corner of my thoughts. Days went by, but the feeling of unease stuck with me. Every time I saw Lauren, the memory of her soft smile and that faraway look she had during the video call popped into my mind. It was like a shadow that wouldn't leave, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. I began to notice little things. Lauren acting a bit different. It was subtle, but whenever I'd walk into the room, she'd quickly tuck her phone out of sight or snap her laptop shut. I thought I was imagining it at first, but as time passed, it felt too intentional to be a coincidence. One morning at breakfast, I caught her glancing at her phone, and for just a second, I glimpsed the name on the screen before she quickly turned it over. I couldn't make out what it said, but something about the way she did it confirmed my suspicions. That name, whoever it was, seemed like it wasn't meant for anyone else to see. The doubt gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to let it go, to just move on, but the other part couldn't. I started paying closer attention to her, making excuses to stick around the house more often, noticing how she disappeared for long periods in her office or abruptly end calls when I walked in. I kept telling myself to respect her privacy, but I felt pulled toward a truth that felt just out of reach. One evening, I came up with an excuse to borrow her laptop. I said my own computer wasn't working, and I just needed to check something online. She hesitated, but eventually handed it over. As I opened the browser, I noticed a few recent tabs that didn't match her usual pattern of art blogs and painting tutorials. There were a couple of chat forums, the kind meant for support or finding connections with other adults going through difficult times. I couldn't help but wonder, was she looking for something more than just friendship? That night, my mind was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. The way she laughed with him, the warmth in her voice. Was this just about a friend helping her through a rough patch, or was there more? I wanted to ask her directly to get the truth, but I worried it would only make things worse. Lauren had always been there for me, caring and steady, especially when Dad was wrapped up in work. She kept our family together in so many ways. But what was happening now? And what did it mean for us? I lay awake, tossing and turning, torn between the fear of what I might find out and the need to know. Whatever was going on, I couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong. I decided that the next chance I got, I'd have to confront her, one way or another. After days of letting my thoughts simmer, I finally worked up the courage to talk to Lauren directly. It felt strange, almost unreal, but I knew that keeping quiet was just feeding the tension. I caught her in the kitchen one evening when Dad was, as usual, running late at work. She was prepping dinner, focused on chopping vegetables, her face a mix of concentration and something I couldn't quite place. It was now or never. "Lauren," I said, my voice firmer than I'd expected. She looked up, slightly startled, as if sensing the seriousness in my tone. She put down the knife, her expression turning cautious. "What's going on, James?" she asked, trying to smile. But I could tell she knew something was coming. I took a deep breath. "Who's the guy you've been talking to? The one on video calls?" I watched as her face registered a mix of emotions, surprise, worry, and maybe even a hint of guilt. For a second, she looked like she might deny it, but then she sighed and leaned back against the counter. "James, that's his name is Ben. He's an old friend." Her voice was soft, careful. "We've known each other for years. I didn't mean for it to seem secretive, but he's been someone I could talk to when things got tough." I felt a mix of relief and frustration. But why keep it hidden from Dad? Or from me? I mean, it's pretty obvious something's going on. She looked down, folding her hands as if searching for the right words. "It's complicated," she admitted. "Your dad and we've been distant for a while now. And Ben, he's just been there to listen, to remind me that I still matter." Her voice grew softer, almost as if she were talking more to herself than to me. "But it's not what you think." There was something about the way she said it that made me pause. I wanted to believe her, but at the same time, I felt like I still wasn't getting the whole story. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. But as I looked at her standing there, unsure and maybe a little sad, I realized that pressing her further might only make things worse. I nodded, trying to keep my own emotions in check. "Okay," I said, not really sure what else to say. I didn't feel like I had all the answers, but I felt a small sense of relief that I'd at least brought it out into the open. For now. Maybe that was enough. I turned and left the kitchen, letting her return to her thoughts, while I tried to make sense of mine. After that conversation with Lauren, things in our family started to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but it was there, a subtle shift in the air. The unease I'd been feeling didn't disappear overnight, but it softened. Like a storm beginning to clear. Lauren seemed lighter, less on edge, and even Dad began to act differently, though I wasn't sure if it was coincidence or something deeper. Dad started coming home earlier. Instead of spending all his time buried in work, he made an effort to sit down with us for dinner, cracking jokes or asking about our day. It was strange at first, seeing him so present. Lauren, for her part, seemed to meet him halfway, engaging in conversations with a warmth I hadn't seen in a long time. There was still a tension between them, but it wasn't the sharp, unspoken kind. It felt more like two people trying to rebuild something fragile. One evening, after a particularly long day at school, I came home to find the living room lit with the soft glow of table lamps. Peeking in, I saw Lauren and Dad sitting on the couch together, cups of tea in their hands. They were laughing about something. What exactly, I couldn't tell, but it wasn't forced. It was genuine. For a moment, they looked like a younger version of themselves, like the kind of couple you see in old photos, full of hope and possibilities. I stood there in the hallway watching them. It felt almost surreal, but also right. Maybe things weren't perfect, but they were better, and that was enough for now. The next day, I found a moment to talk to Lauren. It wasn't about confronting her or digging for answers anymore. I just wanted to check in. We sat outside on the back porch, the fading sunlight painting everything in shades of gold and pink. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. "You seem happier," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She turned to me, her eyes soft, and nodded. "I am," she admitted. "You know, James, sometimes it takes a moment of clarity to realize what you already have." Ben helped me see that in a way. He reminded me that I mattered, that I'm not invisible. But I also realized that everything I need is right here, with you and your dad. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the weight I'd been carrying had lifted. Lauren smiled and placed her hand gently on mine. It wasn't an apology. It didn't need to be. It was her way of saying things were going to be okay. Later that evening, we all sat down for dinner together, something we hadn't done in what felt like forever. Dad had cooked, an amateur attempt at pasta that somehow tasted amazing because of the effort. Lauren laughed at his jokes, and I found myself smiling without thinking. As I looked around the table, I realized something important. Families aren't perfect. They're messy and complicated, full of cracks and unexpected challenges. But when people are willing to try, when they choose to fight for each other, it's possible to heal, even when it feels like everything is broken. That night, I went to bed feeling lighter, like we'd all taken the first steps towards something new. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful.